Yes, it is that time again. And so, I welcome you to The Truth in a Nutshell, the most jam-packed 10 minutes on the internet, bar none. I am Michael Boldea, your host, and knowing how precious time is, I try to fit as much as I can into a 10-minute teaching so you can get your spiritual nourishment in something akin to an appetizer rather than a 5-course meal. If perchance you do desire a 5-course meal, then I would encourage you to go to the Hand of Help website, oddly enough found at www.handofhelp.com, where we have longer teachings as well as books and written materials for your edification and spiritual succor. I have often wondered, if only to myself, what makes some individuals perpetually unthankful and ungrateful, always searching for more of this world, coveting everything their neighbors possess, while simultaneously declaring to all who would hear that they themselves have nothing, and what makes others thankful? What makes some people content with the blessings that God has already bestowed upon them? I've had the privilege of knowing thankful people throughout my life. Those who perhaps were not what we would consider blessed from a worldly perspective, but who were rich in the Lord. And I have also had the misfortune of knowing ungrateful and unthankful individuals who have more possessions than the average person, yet still consider themselves stricken and are underwhelmed with the bountiful blessings that God bestowed upon them on a daily basis. So how do we come to have a grateful heart? How can we be thankful to God for the little things, the things that we take for granted sometimes, or the things that we feel as though we're entitled to? The first step towards having a grateful heart, the first step towards having a thankful heart, is to recognize the dangers of being unthankful and ungrateful. Romans 1:20 and 21 says this, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because, although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened." Yes, there is a danger in having an ungrateful and unthankful heart, because these are not destinations in and of themselves. They are road signs towards becoming futile in our thoughts and having darkened hearts. Being unthankful or being ungrateful are symptoms of an underlying disease that turns men's hearts away from God once the disease reaches maturity. When we do not acknowledge that all things come from God, we begin to believe that it is by our own ingenuity and our prowess, our excellence, or our will that we've accomplished, achieved, or accumulated all that we have in this present life. And so we no longer glorify God, nor are we thankful towards him. Our thoughts become futile. We start to believe that we can readily declare our independence from God without consequence, and that we can turn our backs on him without any after effect. And so our hearts are darkened. And professing to be wise, we become nothing more than fools. The darkening of one's heart is a process like everything else, and many refuse to see the road that they're headed down until they reach the bottom. Once they've reached the bottom, they have a choice. Men either cry out to God for help, humble themselves, and accept his outstretched arms, or they grow more bitter against him still. Either way, one thing is certain: once an individual has reached bottom, they are at the crossroads of their existence, and they alone can choose which way to turn. There is a strength that comes from the constant acknowledgement and recognition that God is the source of all blessing. There is a strength that comes from having a grateful and thankful heart, and in the difficult days ahead, this knowledge and this certainty that God is in control will keep us from growing fearful, uncertain, and even reactionary like much of the world will be. If God is my provider, what have I to fear? If God is my provision, what have I to worry about? It is from his hand that all blessing comes. And knowing that he is a good father, I know that he will provide. When we acknowledge and believe God in all his wonder, splendor, power, majesty, and dominion, then we will never again fear. We will never again be uncertain or grow despondent. It is because many people simply do not know God that they are fearful of what tomorrow holds. It is because they never understood the power of the God they purport to serve that so many are beside themselves in these uncertain times. The second step towards having a thankful or grateful heart is learning to thank God for the little things. For those things that we take for granted or overlook on a daily basis. One of the greatest examples of a thankful heart, even when being thankful wasn't easy, is Job. Here is a man who had everything, then lost everything, and eventually ended up sitting in the middle of some ashes, scraping himself with a potsherd. And it is at this moment, this lowest moment of his existence, that his wife comes to him, not only mocking his integrity, but encouraging him to curse God and die. Job 2 verse 10 says it this way, "But he said to her, 'You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity?' In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." Here was a man who understood that all things come from God. And wherever God is, he rules. Whether blessing or adversity, there is a higher purpose than what we can presently see. In all that he endured, Job did not sin with his lips. He did not sin against God because he had a thankful heart. He had a grateful heart, and he understood that the source of all he'd had and lost was not himself, but rather in the God that he served. The third step towards having a thankful heart or a grateful heart is to understand and perceive the ways in which God uses adversity and difficulty to grow us spiritually. Admittedly, this is the most difficult step of all because none of us likes adversity. And in the midst of it, it is difficult to see the plan of God, but we must believe with all of our heart that God has a plan nevertheless. Yes, in our adversity, in our hardship, in our lack, God has a plan. He sees beyond today into tomorrow and sees what we will become once we traverse the valley of hardship with faithfulness and steadfastness. God's desire is to mature us as individuals. It is to grow us spiritually that we might be useful to his kingdom and his plan for our lives. Romans 8:28 says it this way, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose." Yes, this is an often quoted verse, but just because it is often quoted, it does not take away from the truth that it possesses. All things work together for good to those who love God. And this we know. We don't assume, we don't think, we don't wonder if. We know that all things work together for good, and this gives us comfort, and it gives us peace, and it gives us a thankful heart even in the midst of hardships and affliction. Being thankful, being grateful, possessing a thankful and grateful heart is not an obligation but rather a privilege. Yes, possessing a thankful and grateful heart is possessing the privilege of seeing this present reality, this present life, from an eternal perspective. We are passing through this life, and whatever chiseling and molding we might have to endure in order to obtain the life to come, we know that it is necessary. And as such, we must be ever grateful to God for loving us enough to mold and chisel us. No matter what, we cannot lose sight of eternity. And everything that we go through here on earth must be viewed through the prism of the eternity that beckons. When we do this, we will be ever grateful to our Father in heaven, who loved us to such an extent that he sent Jesus to redeem us from death and despair. As always, thank you for joining us. And until next time, this has been The Truth in a Nutshell. God bless you.